I'm really delighted that so many of you are able to join this afternoon. This is a little bit of an experiment. Those of you that have been following the Sussex and the City programme to date, which I'll talk through very, very briefly in a second, will know this is a collaborative, iterative conversation with many parts and very much responding to what people are asking to know more about. And this is the first online roundtable that we are doing, and we'll see how it goes. But we've got a really interesting group of very much Sussex regional and local experts on business growth and the economy with us, but also other guests from other parts of the country, which I'm really delighted about as well. So I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation. So, how Sussex Devolution needs to help more businesses to grow. This is one of a number of conversations we're having, looking particularly at the changing economy in the south coast of the UK through the lens of local government reorganisation and devolution. In a week, particularly in this conversation, in a week where a new industrial strategy has been published, where a new creative industries plan has been published, it seems that every day or every other day there's a new government thing pinging in my inbox with hundreds and hundreds of pages of I'm not quite sure what that we have to get our heads around. So it does feel that all of these conversations are quite febrile at the moment, but we are very particularly looking at the fast track towards a strategic mayoral authority in Sussex and Brighton and the implications that is going to have, good and bad, perhaps, on the Sussex economy. So this session is being recorded and it will be shared as part of the Sussex and the City resources. So hello to everybody live, but also hello to all the people in the future that will be accessing this at a later date. So I'm going to just very briefly talk a little bit about Sussex and the City, just for a couple of minutes, and then I'll set the tone for what we're going to be talking about this afternoon and how it's going to roll. So Sussex and the City is an independent, non-political platform about devolution in Sussex and Brighton. Primarily, we've got one aim, which is to figure out what good looks like. So to have a conversation with as many people as we can that are interested, that care, that have a kind of leadership perspective on the region, on a region that historically has been quite carved up and fragmented. And so to kind of step back a little bit and think, okay, well, what does this opportunity look like and how do we make the most of it? So I'm drawing on as much insight, expertise and perspective. Not everybody agrees, and I think that's really important, but to try and take that conversation away from perhaps some of the more fraught politics that exists around some of these things, but looking at the facts, looking at the truth, and how we can navigate it together. So we have a podcast, it comes out every week, huge numbers subscribing, great, lots of feedback, and we're really excited about where that's going. So do tune in and listen. Real diversity of voices there, available on all good streaming platforms. We have real-time bulletins that come out sometimes daily, sometimes every other day via email. They're short, pithy reads that are trying to make sense of things as they're happening, new reports, data, new decisions being made, and trying to break it down for a wide audience. So please do sign up for those if you haven't already. And roundtables, well, you're in a roundtable, so you know that these exist, so that's the start. But we've got many coming up. I'll revisit those at the end, the ones that we've got coming up in July. But again, please do, if you enjoy today, come back in the future. And then we have something called the Sussex and the City 100, which is a growing coalition of leadership organisations right across Sussex and Brighton, covering all sorts of different sectors, from professional services to culture to events to finance, everything, co-working spaces, people who are getting behind us, being part of it, helping us to shape this, and we are always looking to add new organisations to that we can amplify and celebrate as part of Sussex success story. So if that is of interest to you, please do ping me a line. So I'm Richard. I'm the sort of convener of Sussex and the City and chief exec of Always Possible, a economic and social innovation agency. And yeah, try not to let this completely consume every waking minute of my life, but failing in that because it is a deeply interesting and moving subject. So I would very much like to thank Galloway Accounting, who are part of the Sussex and the City 100 and have very much enabled these, particularly this online event to happen today, and also represent, I think, quite a lot of interesting stories around growth and innovation in the region as an accountancy firm that is got its very own very exciting growth story at the moment. So I'd just like to introduce James from Galloway's, who's going to talk for a couple of minutes before and to sort of give a slight entry into the conversation, and then I'll run through the sections we're going to discuss today and what we're going to cover. James.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's a quick introduction to myself and James Burt from Galloway's. I'm one of the partners in the Brighton office. I've been in the industry for 17 years now. We've got 7 offices across Sussex and over 300 members of staff, and they're good members of staff. And I think where I came from, I was a roof tiler until I was 21, and then went in as green can be to accountancy and worked my way up over 16, 17 years. And where I'm at and what I like with Galloway's is that we want access to talent, and that talent doesn't necessarily have to come out of university. It can come from everywhere. So linking with education providers, whatever that may look like at whatever age, is really important to us because, I think every single one of our trainees is on an apprenticeship scheme that we give access to move up through the ranks and show them that there is a path all the way to the top inside of Sussex, and there's not necessarily a need to go to London to do that. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, James. Yeah, and as I said, it's really exciting for this project and conversation to have organisations like Galloway's who are helping themselves hundreds of growing businesses to navigate. So thank you for your support. So what we're going to look at today, well, I've kind of so the questions that we're going to try and answer have been crowdsourced. Some of you have submitted them when you've signed up to the event, but we've also gone out and spoken to a wide range of business leaders across Sussex and Brighton. So we're not going to, I mean, we've collated about 100 questions, so we're not going to go through them one by one, but we've sort of clustered them into themes. And what I'd like to do is for each theme, I'm going to present just a couple of minutes of context, sort of where we are at the moment, and maybe what we've learned from devolution in other places, or what some of the implications might be, some of the risks and challenges, and then call on people in the room to help me try and answer some key questions about this or draw on some insights and expertise. And I'm really delighted by the range of expertise that we do have. So some of you know you're going to be asked, and some of you maybe don't. So I'm gonna look at my list and try and ensure we have a kind of range of voices and input. If you don't want, if you want to tell me to pay off and you're just here to listen, that's fine. But I think we'll get in the throw of the conversation, and it'll be fun. So first thing we're going to look at is the subject of business support. So it's a kind of ongoing conversation really about, what is the role of the state in helping businesses to grow? There's a reasonable argument, which is the thing the state can do is get out the way. And that's what will create conditions for innovation, entrepreneurialism, and startup culture. We know probably it's not quite as simple as that, and particularly in Sussex, where it's a very small business economy. And actually, the local government and the universities have had a really, really big role in creating a business support ecosystem. So I'm interested in whether that's effective and what good looks like and how that might change when there is a more regional approach. So just a quick little bit of context. So at the moment, there is a three growth hubs that cover the region of Sussex. Sussex, 1.7 million people, sort of 100-mile sausage along the south coast. Many regions of that size would have one growth hub, and that's probably what might happen under a new devolved authority. But at the moment, we have three, and then sitting within those growth hubs are a myriad of contracts, schemes, initiatives, grants programs, and obviously alongside and in partnership with this are university funded incubators and accelerators, and a whole range of support. Now, it's not that that support is not fantastic. A lot of it is really is, and it's not that a lot of it's not sort of there all year round. I think one of the big challenges that businesses find is just how complex it is to navigate, and often it's very funding driven, which means it's not always around for very long, and some of the knowledge that's built gets lost when things move on. So, quick bit of context about the Sussex ecosystem, because there's 97.5% of Sussex's nearly 100,000 businesses employ fewer than 50 people. We are a small business economy. In fact, only 265 businesses in the whole region employ over 250 people. That does make Sussex a bit of an outlier. And in East Sussex part, there are only 45 large businesses, which makes it really only comparable with the Lake District, which is unusual for the southeast. Brighton Hove has one of the UK's highest startup rates, but only 30% of those businesses scale within 5 years. So there's something working really, really well, and then working less well when those businesses get to a certain size. Just over 15% of all people working in Sussex are self-employed, which is well above the England average. So it is an economy driven not just by small businesses, but also the freelance economy and the gig economy. And as I said, we've got a stream of innovation hubs, incubators, chambers, council-run programs, but there is no unified strategic business support ecosystem across the region. And a lot of these initiatives are short-term, they're postcode restricted, definitely underfunded, and often only target startups. And arguably that's why we have such a buoyant startup system. So I know there's a shift towards scale up more recently, and there are people in the call today that are driving that, but that does feel more recent. Sussex has vibrant sector clusters in digital healthcare, green energy, and professional services, but a lot of the business support that's available is not tailored to sector-specific challenges, things like regulation, complexity, infrastructure. It tends to be fairly generic and sort of catch-all because it has to be given the size of the businesses involved. So that's a little bit of context about what's happening in Sussex. So if we think about it from a devolution perspective and where devolution might change things, well, a couple of quick case studies. West Midlands Combined Authority created something called Business Growth West Midlands, which is a one-stop platform that covers 7 unitary authorities. And what their emphasis is on user journey for business advice, grants, mentoring, and finance. So actually, a lot of that design has gone into supporting people to navigate it depending on where they're at. So, one service that meets people at different stages, and particularly focused on scale-ups and underrepresented entrepreneurs. First year of that program in 2023 had an 11 to 1 ratio return on investment, secured 4 million in new investment for SMEs, and there's projection of an extra 15 million in turnover of the participating businesses. And in Greater Manchester, they've done a lot of work over the last 10 years on what they call the Growth Company, which is a public-private sort of jointly run investment vehicle, and also offers a package of scale-up services, in particular things like export advice and digital transformation, which is overseen by a board of business representatives. So they support about 22,000 businesses a year on things like transformation, R&D, and leadership development, and have secured a huge amount of private investment. Initially, with the mayoral authority underwriting some of that risk. So I'm not saying they are the utopia. I'm saying they are examples of maybe what can happen with a regional view, and there's things there to learn from. Locally, and we might draw on this a little bit. I know Simon and Maria are in the room, and I'm working on a project called Logical Progression, which is, and Graham's here as well, I think, which is really trying to unpick the scale up, the conditions for scale up within the region and what those conditions might need to be, not just dwelling on the problems, but really unpicking some of the barriers that can be removed. So if anyone is interested in finding out more about the sort of hypotheses that are being put forward and some beginning for some answers, do download the report for free at logical-progression.org. We'll put a link in it to follow up. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context there that we are kind of moving a little bit from the focus from startups, which we know the area is known for, to a more scale up ecology. So I'd like to bring some voices in now to think about these questions about business support and what should it look like from a kind of regional view, and are there opportunities to do things a little bit differently, perhaps within a devolved authority? So I'd really like to invite to the call Philippa Batting. So I've banged on about Sussex, and I'm going to bang on about Sussex, but actually, where I want to start with an expert guest is somebody not from Sussex at all. And Philippa is the chief executive of Buckinghamshire Business First, and is a sort of national voice on business growth, and supports the growth story in Buckinghamshire, which is about the same size as East Sussex, and I think shares some of the same challenges in that, its proximity to London and no great big city infrastructure. But I'm really keen to hear from Philippa about what you've learnt from some, in the kind of shift in thinking and maybe what we might learn down here in Sussex. So welcome. Hello.
Hi, and it is constantly shifting sands, isn't it? So a little bit about Buckinghamshire Business First. We've been around in one guise or another, and I say that because I think the game we're all in is about making sure that we're palatable as organisations to receive funding from national government. So we've been around in one guise or another for over 20 years. We lived through Business Link, we lived through the RDAs, we lived through the emergence of local enterprise partnerships and growth hubs, skills hubs, local skills improvement plans. We host the Buckinghamshire Growth Hub and we host the Buckinghamshire Skills Hub, and we are the employer representative body for the local skills improvement plan. And we have moved the furniture around many times to capitalise on opportunities to ensure that we get access to funding for growth. Buckinghamshire is a micro economy. We've got 97% of our businesses are 10 or less employees. We have 92 businesses with more than 250 employees, so very, very similar. When local enterprise partnerships were formally established back in 2011, Buckinghamshire was one of the last to establish a local enterprise partnership. And I tell you that because we got to feel what it was like being in white space, where everybody around us was getting involved with this thing called local enterprise partnerships, and actually Buckinghamshire wasn't, for various reasons. But what we saw was that there was considerable funding opportunities coming down the tubes and going through these new things called local enterprise partnerships. So a Buckinghamshire local enterprise partnership was put into being. And off the back of that, Buckinghamshire benefited from over 100 and probably 110 million pounds worth of funding. So they got Growing Places Fund, they got Local Growth Fund, they got Getting Building Funds, they got European structural funds, they got enterprise owned retained business rates. And so in terms of a regional authority versus the sort of 2 or 3 tier council system, what I think I see, and this is coming from a place where Buckinghamshire hasn't totally got on engaged with the devolution agenda. We have a I think it's a level 2 devolution
Mhm.
deal. Um, but what we can see is that funding is going to come through to strategic authorities. We can see that strategic authorities with a local growth plan will have, a 10-year strategic framework for growth, and they will get access to things like the UK Shared Prosperity Fund replacement. Now, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund for Buckinghamshire has funded an incredible amount of business support. For the UK, it was worth 2.6 billion over 3 years. That has provided an enormous amount of growth funding and startup funding, support with net zero, getting businesses to recognise the contribution they can make to reducing carbon emissions. So I think what I see is that, the strategic authorities are the game in town if we want to access the funding that will support um, the revenue requirements for supporting businesses at the level of the firm.
Mhm.
Um, and I suppose what I'd also add, Richard, is we have the emergence now of this new national provision, which is called the Business Growth Service, and we need to think about how local business support provision complements, not duplicates that, and where we can add value. And I seriously think it will only be through accessing these additional funds through the strategic authorities that we're going to be able to do that.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful, and yeah, mirrors or echoes rather a lot of the mood music and what I'm hearing, and certainly what was in the industrial strategy.
Mm,
And Sussex has benefited from UK SPF funding, of course, as well. Not as much as other areas, but that is done at county or unitary level, which at the moment is three, and then there's a sort of bun fight for where that comes trickles down at district and borough level. So actually, the impact of a lot of that funding has not been quite as widespread as it could have been because it definitely hasn't been done regionally.
no.
Thank you. So I'd like to bring some other people. Sam Harland, I'd like to turn to you just simply because I know that you've worked on pretty much every single business support project there's been
I wouldn't say
in
that.
Sussex over the last few years. Well, it's a compliment.
Oh, thank you. It's an
It had a lot of
exaggeration.
value,
I wouldn't say everyone, but yeah.
but what's just a couple of points on maybe your view on how effective a lot of that support has been. How can we say it's been good overall, and what might be better if it's done on a less sort of postcode lottery?
Yes. So thanks, Richard. Yeah. So just a little bit of an introduction. So I have worked at Plus Innovation. I've worked at Wide Sussex and also the NatWest Accelerator. So what that's given me over the last sort of 9 years is a really good understanding of startups and scale ups, what they're asking for, but mainly in Brighton. So I've been mainly on these programs based in Brighton. And it's only the last 18 months working for myself that I've expanded across both West Sussex County Council programs and East Sussex County Council. So actually, it's really opened my eyes on there is a world outside of Brighton, and really hearing from businesses who live in more rural places what they experience, and working on some of these programs that span, some more rural areas. And my views, having done so, has like really changed. So what I feel now is that it's very restrictive, like more restrictive than I thought with these postcode programs, because as we know, Brighton's an expensive place to live, and myself and others have had to gravitate towards other cities such and towns such as Worthing, but still identify very much as, a lot of people are still based in Brighton as a business. So there's lots of like kind of where people live and where they're running their business is changing. And it's really affecting, where they're getting business support. So where they identify as a business, but then where they can actually get business support from because of where they live or where their business is registered. And I think it's a great shame because we're not a massive county. I mean, when you do look at it, sometimes you think, wow, but compared to other regions, so Birmingham and Manchester, And I just think it's a shame that we can't have a bit more of a combined take on Sussex. So when I heard about devolution and everything happening, I know that there's a lot of points which you're making about the pros and cons, but I'm really optimistic, maybe wrongfully so, but I'm really hoping that this can create a bit more positive change in the way that we distribute funds to have more widespread programs and ones that, like you said, are longer. Having worked on the Bright project plus X Innovation, which was 3 years long, even that didn't feel long enough at 3 years. So having programs that only run for, some of them, that I've worked on recently have only been 2 cohorts over, 6-month period. And it's just really difficult to have a legacy. And there's just so much good work that goes into that, but it's really hard to keep that going without continuous funding.
Yeah, no, really important, and I think your view on this is really important because, as you said, you've sort of dabbled in a few areas, as I have, and I think that's absolutely right. So much of the administration is saying no to people because they're from the wrong postcode or their business is registered in the wrong part of town, which feels completely counterintuitive. So, I want to move on to really looking at growth sectors, because I think that's going to drive a huge amount of where investment in energy is in the region. But very, very briefly, just wanted to bring in either Maria or Simon. I know that you've been working on a dedicated sort of scale up project recently in Brighton, but that was a very small amount of money and a very, very short amount of time. But I wondered, but it's sort of one of the first scale up sort of focused bits of work. So I wondered if you had a couple of reflections on sort of scale up readiness with some of the businesses you worked on and how that funding was used to bring together the participants. Maria?
Thanks, Richard. It was Maria's program, so I'll let her take the way. Yeah.
It was Sussex Innovation Programs, so not mine.
Maria there.
I guess there are important reflections about it because, as you mentioned, it was very short. And as usual, as you guys, many in the call already knows, no matter the funded project, usually funding is often short-term, high competitive, and focus a lot on micrometrics like job creation. And we need to take a look on what scale-ups really need, even if it was successful for what we received the fund. So in terms of confidence to raise money, because in 3 months you can actually just change confidence and mindset. There are not a lot of interventions that are possible in 3 months. What we think should happen from a scale-up point of view is that we should create a local business priority framework. And that's where I think, and please feel free to debate or critique what I'm about to say, that's where I feel that devolution must become functional and not rhetorical. So we should create a framework with all the counties and the authorities. Oops.
Someone's having a nice time. Mute yourselves if you're not Maria, that'd be great. Thank you.
So that way we ensure that any central part that is coming for scale-ups is aligned with what is truly needed locally. So not only job reflection, but is decarbonization, is digital inclusion, is rural entrepreneurship, because there are not scale-ups. So what we need to actually fuel the potential scale-ups up there. I'm gonna share also a dream with you guys. This is just a dream. So again, please feel free to debate it. What we think is that we should have commissioning boards. So rather than bidding for little pots of money here and there, we should have a local partnership to design funding calls. So imagine all the knowledge and expertise in this room here in Zoom, help co-create the next Innovate UK challenge for Sussex. And that way we ensure not only the outputs and the delivery plan, but also what is expected from a business point of view. Sometimes it feels that the funding is not connected with the expectations of a business, no matter the stage. What is really needed out there? What do I need one-to-one support only for 12 hours? Perhaps I just need 1 hour with the right conversation with the right person to put a plan together. And that's where we think we should respond not to generic outcomes that we always see in the same funding. No matter, I'm going to talk about our experience with Deliver UK SPF in both London and and the outcomes were the same. Why they were the same if we are talking about completely different conditions. So how can we create a Sussex identity for those calls? But I'm just a dreamer. Sorry if I'm sharing a little bit of deep reflections that we have been on the team.
We have the same dreamer here. Love it, and really practical as well. Thank you. I'm going to move on to growth sectors because I think that's a really big part that underpins a lot of certainly where central government thinking is. A little bit of context. What's the good news story? Well, West Sussex, Worthing's got some surprising growth in professional technical services. Actually, one of the most productive towns in England. Really, really undersold as a regional story. Crawley rebounded from COVID much quicker than people thought because of the aviation job losses. With engineering, automation, supply chain technologies, quite a lot of innovation happening there. And Chichester, agritech, the sort of data-led growing economy, really, really interesting, and certainly chimes with a lot of the industrial strategy about food security and green innovation. East Sussex, it's not as bold an economy. We have to be realistic about that, but actually there's some real gems. Lewis is a creative microcluster, certainly in things like publishing and independent media, some really interesting organisations there. New Haven is becoming a radical place for maritime offshore wind and hydrogen logistics, and some really interesting companies there. Didn't get its Freeport status, but who knows? Maybe it will with some new devolution levers and pulleys. And I'm doing some work on the South Downs National Park at the moment, and actually looking under the bonnet of the economy there. It is the most economically active in the UK, with a surprisingly resilient, independent knowledge economy business based. It's got 18 B Corp in the last 2 years, so actually it's driving a bit of a revolution in kind of responsible and environmentally sound business. It's a really interesting bit of the country to have a look at that is very different to the Lake District. And then, of course, Brighton, digital tech ecosystem, 40% growth in employment in the last sort of 8 years. And the Brighton University Health Innovation Hub, as well as, both universities really are driving some really interesting growth work in ageing and assistive tech. We've got some very, very exciting stories here, but obviously a big but. In West Sussex, big patches, certainly on the coast. Investor confidence is low, reputation's not great for opportunity, and regeneration is slow. We've got a lot of work to do around sort of infrastructure, transport, and high streets. We've got a lot of very, very wealthy parts of Sussex where the income in households is from renting out property. It's not productive income. There's a lot of people that aren't working and sort of not creating jobs and investing that money into enterprise, and that's actually happening at quite a big scale. So what that leaves us with is people that aren't working but earning money from houses that young people can't afford. So that drives them away. That is not a good system for us to necessarily support long term. And in East Sussex, there's a lot of over-reliance on public sector jobs. And in Eastbourne and places like Hastings, despite lots of intervention, is still a low wage and low productivity economy. So there's work to do to ensure that the prosperous places have a ripple effect. And Brighton itself has a big skills mismatch. We know that 90% of businesses are saying they cannot employ and find the right staff, but we've got a lot of people looking for work. Something's going wrong there in terms of joining up what people are learning and what people are looking for. So, and then very quickly, the industrial strategy came out. I was very excited about that. I thought, well, that's good timing. We're doing a roundtable on this week. Did Control F, look for Brighton, look for Sussex. got ChatGPT to go, what's the headlines? What's it good for Brighton? What's it good for Sussex? Pretty bleak, to be honest. Well, good news is we're going to have a mayor soon, and that's where they're putting the money, no doubt about it. But it mentioned Brighton once in a kind of quite a generic sort of grouping together of some cities on the south coast that have generically got a kind of creative tech offer. Look at where they are, very, very specifically directing funding and investment. Oxford was mentioned 16 times as the sort of beacon of where infrastructure investment is going to go in the southeast. So we have some work to do. So I'm keen to bring in, some voices to help me unpick this a little bit and think about how do we build on the gems? How do we create or foster the ideas of clusters so that we can go to central government and say, look, there's a really, a unique bit of the economy that we can get behind here. I would like to go to Amanda first, who I know has been doing a lot of work in London with the tech sector, and you've got some interesting observations about the sort of founder to scale up journey and mindset in Sussex.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Richard. I feel like somewhat of an imposter because I'm quite new to the region, but I guess, yeah, I can give my view on my background from London and working with tech startups. And then I've been in Brighton and Sussex for about 18 months now. I saw this morning the Entrepreneurs Network published their survey of nationally of entrepreneurs, and it said something like 84% of founders disagree that the government understands the needs of entrepreneurs. So I was thinking in terms of devolution, I suppose, local and national government level, the first thing that needs to be done is to build trust, because I think it's very easy for founders to kind of just ignore local government and sort of think, well, I'll get on with building my business anyway, and I'm not going to get much support. And it's something I've noticed in Sussex when I moved down here is that I'm told a lot of things like there's no funding, there's no this, there's not enough that for business growth. And so I took that at face value when I first moved here. But actually, as this call shows, there are quite a lot of things and things that are doing really good support for tech founders, whether startup or scaling up focus. So I think one of the most useful things the devolution process could do is that critical self-assessment of what is working and help us define what does working look like. I noticed, Richard, on one of your earlier slides talking about scaling, for example, it was talking about businesses growing, but in terms of headcount. And I guess one thing I would point out is that that's different to, for example, revenue numbers or profit. And they're all different, goals. So it's kind of like thinking about what maybe in different sectors and different focus areas, what are businesses actually in Sussex and the region trying to achieve, and how are we trying to support that? And I think what I've seen Sussex do really well is breadth and participation and including lots of different voices. And maybe one thing that definitely tech founders I think would benefit from is also depth of really going into a sector. And it sounds like some of the research and projects being worked on anyway are doing that. But to really identify from a business model or industry perspective what is needed from a particular audience, and then be able to kind of at a systems level connect the dots in the right way.
Yeah, brilliant. No, really, really valuable. And I think the perspective that you're bringing from having lived and breathed this in London, certainly the chats we've had have been really illuminating. Graham, you've put in a really interesting comment in the chat. Can I bring you in?
Sure.
So talk me through what your point was there.
My point there is, I think, there are three things that I mentioned. That I think a top-down and bottom-up approach is required. I think when you set up the whole forum, you were saying, well, do we need government in business in the middle of business ecosystems or outside it? I think we really need government to be absolutely in the middle of it. And the top-down piece that I mentioned in the chat was with government, a region or a city needs to figure out actually what its what I call local maximum is. So actually, with a wind in the sails, what is the best, most optimized view of this local economy look like in 5 years or 10 years, and be really realistic about that, and do some really great modeling around that. Because that will automatically start providing some signposts and some benchmarks around what good and average looks like. And that's presenting that framework and socializing it to the point where the bulk of the business community buys into that, I think is really important. It's got a bit of a map and a bit of a compass.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the second piece then talks more to understanding what the is kind of getting rid of redundancy, getting rid of overlap, getting rid of the myriad of support agencies, public-private sectors, sector partnerships, and just having far more effective signposting that maps to the outcomes of that, local maximum. And I think really just clearing out, having a really good clearing of pathways has to go hand in hand with that sort of top-down local maximum idea.
Thank you, Graham. They're really, really important. And again, your insight from having worked in Australia on scale-up cultures there, and what you're bringing back to Sussex is really valuable. I think Sussex can really draw on the breadth of expertise that it has in its locker through being a magnet right now. I think that's really important. So I want to bring Graham Marley in a second from Let's Do Business Group, who's been leading a lot of the funding and investment charge to look at this issue of distribution and investment. Where does investment happen, and what is the distribution across Sussex? Couple of quick points on that. 65% of Sussex residents do not live in Brighton and Crawley, which is an issue for any politician, but also reflects a little bit on perhaps some of the people feeling that they don't get the benefit in their business or where they live and work from some of the conversations around sort of city deals. But of course, Brighton has the strongest inward investment metrics in the region. Whereas places like Eastbourne, Seaford, Bognor and Littlehampton have seen almost no commercial investment in the last 5 years, yet collectively make up the kind of same size of population as Brighton. And actually that's where a lot of people have moved to, because that's where they can afford to live. So we have got to think a little bit more sensibly about perhaps where businesses are supported to grow. Some analysts think Sussex could unlock over 250 million in new private finance, specifically around some growth sectors in green and community energy models and regional innovation missions. This is the kind of country's laboratory. This is where lots of really good ideas that don't happen anywhere else get fostered. So how can we build on that? And then companies like Universal Quantum, the University of Sussex spin-out, secured over 77 million between 2020 and 2022, but had to be in Haywards Heath because that's where there was space. And just by note of that, put Mid Sussex as a constituency in the chart of top 50 startup constituencies, making it the only one in Sussex. But really, that's down to one company. So we need to think, how do we get other constituencies up that list and maybe not reliant on just one company? But what's really interesting when I looked at some of the data around this, Brighton Hove got a higher percentage of total UK foreign direct investment. So in terms of, if you've got, look at the whole pot of foreign investment in the country, Brighton secured about 4% of that. Now, that doesn't sound like much on its own. Obviously, over half goes to London, we know that. But for 4%, that's higher than Manchester got, it's higher than Cambridge got, and it's higher than Birmingham got. So from foreign investment, they're looking at Brighton in as kind of parity or the same bracket as some of these other cities. Whereas internal investment from UK VCs, Brighton got 19 million, Manchester got 190, Cambridge got 800, and Birmingham got 515. So there's more sort of interest from overseas in Brighton than perhaps there is within the country. So what are we doing about that? Is there something that we should be doing more of? Anyway, I'd like to bring Graham in to kind of have a chat with me about your perspective on where and how money flows across the region. As I know you support a number of businesses with loans and grants, but you're also based in Hastings, so you have an interesting perspective there.
Yeah, I do have a different perspective on quite a lot of things, I suppose. And I firstly around sort of there's been a lot of talk around the scale up agenda, but that doesn't touch the sites in Hastings and
No.
Eastbourne. And I think we need to be very aware of the fact that in some parts of Sussex, it's not about scale up, but it is about incrementally helping businesses to increase. Because if all the non-scale ups could increase by 5% a year, that's actually quite a significant improvement in the economy. And as you say, Richard, we're very much involved in finance, both for sort of more the smaller end of startups, but also established businesses that can't access conventional bank finance. And our business has grown significantly since COVID in particular. One thing I was interested in was under the spending review and the government's new investment in the British Business Bank, they've announced a Southeast Fund, which is arguably about 10 years late. It could have been done at the time of Midlands Engine and Northern Powerhouse funds, but it's coming down the line now. And I think that what that might do is create more opportunities, particularly in the sort of venture capital type field, than we have seen previously. But what we need to do is make sure we've got the businesses that are looking at those sorts of high growth opportunities as well. I think the other thing that I would reflect on is the need for a really strong inward investment service for the county moving forward. We managed the East Sussex one for 20 years. But I think as you move to sort of a Sussex-wide mayoral authority, I think it'd be really important to look at both the demand side, so bringing businesses in, but also the supply side. Because if you haven't got the places to put these businesses, you're not going to attract the inward investment. I think far too often inward investment is seen as being about, oh, what can we bring in? Who can we bring in? But you've got to have the conditions right. So I'd be encouraging sort of the mayor to be looking at that supply side and how we encourage new development into the area, particularly outside of Brighton, which is pretty full and fairly constrained by its boundaries. Looking at places like Hastings, again, it's constrained by its geography, being by the sea, but we've got a load of council-owned buildings, commercial buildings, that would be great if you knocked them down and started again, but they're coming to the end of their life. So I think that sort of holistic review of commercial space is going to be really important to the future.
No, really, really good point. Thank you. Which brings me to my final thing, which is around, growth, but what does that actually mean? And, many people making the case for lateral growth, sustainable growth. We need to think about growth beyond just sort of GDP and productivity, especially as, the point you've made there, Graham. Many of these businesses are tiny, and to have conversations about when are you going to be the next scale up is just completely irrelevant. And so there are different considerations about what that means. So again, tiny bit of context. It is not a level playing field across the region. If we are looking at productivity metrics, well, it's much, much, much higher in West Sussex than it is in East Sussex. So let's not perhaps judge everything through exactly those same metrics. The point Maria made earlier about some of these programs, whether they're in London, whether they're in Brighton, they've got the same sort of reporting mechanisms. Well, let's make something that is fit for what we are here. And the region's known for, green enterprise, digital innovation, and purposeful leadership. But what's the coherent story that binds all that so that growth is genuinely sustainable? West Sussex carbon emissions per capita are among the highest in the southeast because the transport's not brilliant, so people have to drive around, and the building stock is old and not particularly efficient. So can we do one without the other? We want to create opportunities for young people. James, at the very start of the meeting, talked about his journey from being a roofer to becoming a partner in one of the biggest accounting firms. We want to have lots of stories like that. But at the moment, 40% of Brighton University graduates or graduates from the Brighton universities, they leave after 2 years because they can't find the work and they can't afford to live here. That didn't used to be the story. So that doesn't feel like a sustainable position from the sense of where talent's coming from. we've got over 300 AI adjacent businesses, but there's not really a coordinated plan for how they work together or how we leverage perhaps some of that real talent for some of the areas across the region in the rural and coastal areas. And we've got potentially a 2 to 3 billion retrofit market. There are massive opportunities around green growth, but have we got the qualified workers? Have we got the accreditation and the skills to seize upon that? The early evidence is no, and actually we're having to offshore or bring lots of skills in. So what can we do around that to make that more joined up? So I'd love to bring in Mark from the University of Sussex Business School. Maybe a question about how we can, certainly maybe the question about how we hold on to graduates.
Yeah, well, I just put something in the chat about that, actually. First of all, I just have to formally say I'm not representing either the business school or the university here today. I'm here as me. This is about things I'm interested in, and there are people. I am working with the university structure to somehow have a formal title about all this, but I don't have any such formal title at the moment, so it's just me talking. Yeah, we have two very, very different universities here, and I'd like to talk about much more about university, because I guess it's my specialist subject today. If you haven't found me yet, find me on LinkedIn and you'll find out my real interest is about politics and communities outside universities, but hey ho, there's a lot of it for me. Sussex University in particular is a really, really odd beast. It was founded as the first of the new universities they were called back in the early 60s. Has a very strong heritage and a very strong identity, and that identity is countercultural and historically has been somewhat anti-business as well. And also, it was founded to have an international view. So the university, I worked up from being, I'm not an academic by background. I was brought on board because I was an accountant and they happened to need somebody for accounting teaching. And then I thought, actually, this is a really interesting place to work. So I helped to set up the business school. I helped run it. I'm in the university senate, university council, and I was involved in the management more than and I don't do research or didn't used to. So the comment I'll pithily make about Sussex is that we tend to know more about poverty in Kuala Lumpur than we do about the average life of somebody living in Molescombe. And this is a problem. So the university itself is going through quite a revolution, saying we need to be much more engaged in our local community. And I'm one of a bunch of voices saying that over and over and over again. Now, a lot of University of Sussex students historically were international, and obviously for reasons that are well rehearsed elsewhere, because of perceived financial challenges by the university, we along with others went around chasing a lot of international students. So when we set the business school up, we suddenly had literally thousands and thousands of international students. Hardly any of them, to be fair, were here to stay in Sussex. What they all saw is that Brighton's a fantastic place to be. The university had high rankings, and London's only half an hour away. So that's one of the pull factors. So for anybody coming to the university, and we don't have a hugely strong student recruitment locally. We get a fair amount of cohort from there, but we tend to get more people from around London and other parts of the UK, and we're growing our local cohort. It is the same issue, and it's an issue, I suspect, in lots of ways about the reality, because I'm an accountant, and I've also been in business development, and I've also worked in social capacity development, where I see money come from government and disappear, like we've all seen. Been through all that lot. And there is this awful truth about we're so overshadowed by London. So if you're an ambitious student and you've come to Sussex University, you've really enjoyed our culture, you've really learned some good stuff, and you really want to move your career on as a young person, unless you get involved in the very dynamic entrepreneurial culture of IT or in community service, which a lot of our students do in terms of working for charities, then clearly the bright lights head north on the train up to Victoria. Is that a sort of useful, pithy summary, Richard?
No, well, there's some really, really interesting observations in there, some I hadn't considered. But yes, so I think it's about, as Sussex starts to, well, all of the universities, I think, and I'm working with all of them in different capacities, think about themselves as of, from, and for the region and think about their role within a lot of these new frameworks. I think there's some really interesting challenges, but also potentially solutions in what you've just
huge solutions, huge opportunities. And what I observe in the cohort coming through now, they're the first cohort who don't see themselves as victims of the pandemic. We had a few years where the students, their psychology was overall, they were victims of the pandemic. What I do see is a fundamental shift in their values where they do really believe that the idea of living in a vibrant community might be better than working in London where you earn loads of money. So there's something in that we can do about keeping really good young people locally because their value sets are changing.
I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot more civic engagement from students than there used to be, and that's marked. Thank you for that. I'm very conscious of time, and I do want to have a few minutes where that's kind of open and people can feed in. But on this point of sustainable business growth and green growth, I wondered if either Steve Creed or Nancy, who represents the rural economy, wanted to chip in with something.
Richard, I'll say a few words.
Thank you, Steve.
I think the big picture here is how we're measuring everything. You know, you talked about number of jobs created. We talk about the amount of economic growth. Graham mentioned that there's lots of small businesses that aren't ready to scale up, and if they all produced a small growth, that would have a very big impact on the economy. If you turn that around the other way, you'd probably have a lot more happy employees, probably a more thriving population in the area, which might lead to more exciting opportunities. So there's that side of it. The other side of it for me is that all these things are linked. You know, if you've got your clusters that you're talking about, should the clusters be focused on things that are going to help growth in startups? In other words, like things like AI, which is there, could it be driven more towards the organizations that are already operating in the country? So could a dry cleaner do something with AI that would make it more efficient, and hence his capital or his growth might go up, but in terms of economics, but he may not employ anybody, but he might be a happier person. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on for me in there, which is kind of much broader than some of the detail, which is very important, but was mentioned by several of the people.
Thank you. No, absolutely. Really good point. Yes, Nancy, did you want to come in? Oh, she's there, right? Okay, I'm going to open it out just for a couple of minutes. Anyone that's not spoken who wants to give 10 words, observation, thought, question, the floor is yours. Okay, shy. Okay, well, as Sarah has written in the chat, we're going to send out all of the questions that we received today. Some of them have been addressed, but there are plenty more. So we welcome you as a sort of a roundtable of experts to continue to germinate, offer some insights. We're going to keep publishing it. We're going to publish your a kind of transcript from this, and we'll share this recording, all with the aim of hopefully having something a bit more in person and a little bit longer than an hour perhaps in the new year, where we can really start to by then we'll have a sense of what the new local government reorganisation looks like. We might have a sense of what some of we've got our heads around what some of the national strategies are, so that we can actually, already in this call there's about 5 or 6, maybe 10 things that are tangible and interesting that we could follow up on and do a whole day on. So actually, if we have a session where we can really start to think about what does good look like, what does different look like, start to war game some scenarios so that we can almost create something that goes in front of the new mayor. We did publish the Hull and Humber mayoral authority, when they were voting for a mayor, the FSB coordinated a sort of manifesto for small business that they put in front of the mayoral candidates that said, this is what good looks like to us. I wonder if we do something similar here. So I want to try and finish on time. Someone got their hand up? Who's got their hand up? Mark, I might not come back to you if that's all right, just because you've spoken. Do pop it in the chat. So we do have. So this has been a whistle stop. We have covered quite a lot in a very short space, but that was the idea. It's provocations, it's thinking, it's bringing together some minds that are thinking about this more widely. You've been absolutely brilliant. Really excited by some of the things that you've come up with. We're going to look at a few other topics in this same way. A kind of hour of intense sort of roundtable. We've got one in 2 weeks looking at land, sea and environment. We've got one the following week looking at tech and digital, and then one the following week looking at arts and culture, and then one after that, which I haven't put here yet, but it's going to be on manufacturing. So I do hope you'll all join me for those as well. But as I said, this is just the start, and it's just a way of being able to collate thinking. I know there's lots of people who've been in this live who haven't had a chance to talk, so I hope you will. Apologies if you did want to, but there are plenty of other opportunity to do so and be involved. So yeah, keep engaging with the program. Join the Sussex and City 100. Sign up to the podcast, and feedback. Tell me what you'd like to hear more of, what questions you want asked, what we should be doing differently, what we should be doing more of. But thank you very, very much indeed. Yeah, huge thanks to our contributors. Yeah, I put you on the spot and you gave eloquent, short, and informed answers. So thank you so much.